This vid's been a long time coming. If you've paid any attention to standard discourse over the past few months, you'll have seen one word pop up again and again. This was the word used to describe how Wizards of the Coast viewed the standard format last month when they hosted their post-set B&R for Tarkir Dragonstorm. At the time, as I've covered in a few videos up until this point, there was already some discontent towards a handful of cards that were dominating the format. Red aggro in general and Up the Beanstalk were two opposite ends of powerful cards that crowded out really a lot of answers. Despite this, to the disappointment of many, myself included, no bans were announced, with Wizards opting to hold steady and not make any changes, citing that new cards from Tarkir and Final Fantasy would mix up the meta. And they did just that. With the new sets, turn 3 aggro, that kills you by then, which was previously the strongest deck, was ousted by a new top deck. Turn 4 aggro with blue. If you were like me and hoping Wizards would make space for Cloud and Sephiroth to at least have a chance in standard, unfortunately, you'll be waiting until some bans, because aggro is so strong right now that the only type of deck in the top 8 of Final Fantasy Pro Tour Las Vegas was either mono red aggro or is it Cori-Steel Cutter. Since then, there's been a lot of discourse about what will happen at the end of June when the bans are announced. In light of that, I'm looking to get in early, given that I believe there will be bans imminently. At the end of the month, WotC does have their yearly once-a-year ban window. And given the fact that none of these high-powered aggro tools are rotating out with Edge of Eternities, I don't think Wizards' usual excuse of waiting to see how new rotation or new sets will change. I don't think that's going to work this time. So with this in mind, I have prepared 10 notorious cards that I've seen discussed as possible ban candidates over the last few months, and will give my prediction on whether or not I believe they'll stick around. You might think 10 is a particularly large number, given the fact that the meta really seems to be defined by 2 aggro decks at the moment. A lot of these are cards that are either relevant now or were relevant a few months ago that may take the stage again if we do see aggro bans. For the record, I don't believe all these cards will be banned, which I will go into detail. If you like this kind of content and do want to see more, let me know in the comments and chuck us a sub. I'm a new YouTube channel, so any support will be a big boost. So as a quick primer, this is the first one of the yearly bans we've ever gotten from Wizards of the Coast. And one of the big things that we need to look out for with these is actually what the scale of the bannings will be. You can see here, I have 10 cards that have been in the discussion for a while now, or some have popped up as recently as Vivi. These are cards that have all been mentioned as possible ban candidates. I have mixed opinions on a lot of them, which I'm gonna explain to you shortly. Effectively, I've determined 5 tiers that I think you could comfortably put in for whether or not a card will be banned. Up the top, you have 100% banned. These are cards that I think you and I both know will probably end up being banned come end of this month. If they aren't, I reckon there will be an absolute uproar and a lot of questions being thrown the Wizards of the Coast's way. There's not going to be many candidates for this. Then we have what I'm calling 99% banned, which is, if I had to guess, the cards in these top 2 categories will be banned, and there may be a little bit of leeway where Wizards choose not to ban any cards in this category, but I expect the card will be banned. Next, there is a category for cards that I think probably should be banned, however, may not be if Wizards choose to do a small scale of banning. So if they only choose to go for 2 to 3 cards, they may choose to skip these, but I suspect they may be problematic in the future, given that many of these will not be rotating out until the end of next year. I think there will be future decks that use these cards and probably take advantage of them. Then we have the low chance bans. These are cards that I might have feelings about being banned, but I don't expect to see them there. They have popped up in conversation, but I just don't think it's their time yet, and I'll explain why for each of them. And then we have cards that I think will not be banned. They may be as a result of being just recently printed, or they may also be weakened if other cards in this list are banned. And for those ones, I'll go into detail why. First up, we're going to do the elephant in the room, I think, or the bear in the room in this case. If you've been paying any attention to Standard, you will know Monstrous Rage is one of the most complained about cards, has been for the last year and a bit now. I am of the belief that it is Monstrous Rage's time to go. Now, it's really important to point out, Monstrous Rage being banned, I don't think solves the red aggro problem we currently have. As I I alluded to in my mouse video, I think Monstrous Rage being gone, we'll just see it be replaced with another buff spell. We have Dreadmaw Ire, which is for 1 less power, going to give something trample anyway, which means that blocking being a irrelevant issue will still exist. Dreadmaw Ire already also hates out Cori-Steel and has seen play as a sideboard option because of it. We also have Turn Inside, if people choose to disregard the trample. There are a lot of red buff spells, basically, and I don't think Monstrous Rage being gone will solve the problem. I think there'll be instances where you'll have a creature with trample as a result of having the roll token, and that'll carry over to the next turn, and I think losing that element will probably have a minor impact on red. But if Wizards determine that Monstrous Rage is the only card they want to ban, I think red aggro will still be a problem. But unsurprisingly, probably to anyone watching this video, Monstrous Rage is the card I expect will be banned at the end of the month. Next up, I want to talk about the newest entry on this list. This is Vivi. If you haven't played against this card before, it has an uncanny ability to absolutely take over games when it comes into play. Unlike him in Commander, where he pretty much just dominates turns and the person who plays him generally plays a 20-minute turn and that results in them winning the game. Standard is so fast right now that when Vivi comes down, it's usually not until the turn after he has played that the player who plays him wins. In the late game, this isn't the case, but again, most of your games are pretty quick in Standard right now. Vivi is definitely a powerful card. Absolutely, undoubtedly. He is definitely the threat people thought he would be before he came out. In Standard, I would argue he is weaker than he is in other formats, given the fact that a red aggro player plays things like Magebane, Lizard, and a bunch of other cards that just murder the Vivi player the turn they play him. Vivi generally is a turn 3, I play my creature and pass, which red will absolutely eat you for breakfast for playing. Having said that, I think Vivi's problematic behavior is more a symptom of Cori-Steel being an issue. We've seen a combo deck where without Cori-Steel Vivi goes well with Agatha's Soul Cauldron and Geralf. The zombies that Geralf makes comes in with counters on them. If you put Vivi under Agatha's Soul Cauldron, you can use those as mana dorks. I think that's a really cool deck, actually. And I think Vivi probably has room to kind of be experimented with more in a world where he is not just a 2 to 3 copy card alongside Cori-Steel which generally seems to be what he is. For that reason, it's probably a little too early, but I do think Vivi is not going to be banned yet because of that, if at all. I just think people freaking out over Vivi probably need to direct their hatred a little bit more to the next card we're going to talk about. You probably knew this was coming. Cori-Steel is the new kid on the block in terms of absolutely bonkers meta-defining power. This card is, in my opinion, very modern power level card in the sense that I don't really think it belongs in Standard. It's probably more suited to a set that's more pushed. I think its impact on the format, while it hasn't been around for long, is definitely being felt. I think that Cori-Steel exists and will continue to exist and be abused because of cantrips. So I'm thinking of Opt, Sleight of Hand. You can't really ban Opt and Sleight of Hand, let's be honest. If for whatever reason, wasn't the best way to do it, red gets Might of the Meek. There's plenty of other 1 mana, 2 mana card draw cards. Stock Up and Thunder Trap Trainer are used to find Cori-Steel at the moment. I think Cori promotes so many negative behaviors in a deck right now. The fact that you can't reliably remove the artifact and the creature it makes, it just outvalues so many decks. Now with Vivi as well, able to generate a bunch of mana, the deck uses things like Steaming Sauna and upgrades that to get an extra card every turn, or upgrades Stormchaser's talent. There's a lot of options for the deck now. So much so that the deck is less of an aggro deck now. It can even play the mid-range game and the late game. It's so powerful, honestly. I think for the health of the game, Cori-Steel is probably going to need to eat a ban. I think we've seen the ceiling of what it's capable of in Standard, and I don't think it's going to get better. I do think that you can print Temporary Lockdown, which is unfortunately rotating out, but you could print a card like it that, you know, absolutely smites Cori-Steel out of the game. You could print Spot Removal that does the same thing. But I think the fact that the turn you play it, it can just come down and take over the game. It doesn't need a turn to cook like Vivi. I think for that reason, honestly, despite the card not being even a couple months old, I think it's probably time for Cori to go. I don't think things are going to get better. Temporary Lockdown is just that, temporary to shut it down. People will bounce it. The fact that Izzet runs so many ways to find it through Stock Up and Thunder Trap Trainer, I think we're going to keep having Cori problems. Even if they ban Rage, even if they ban some of the other cards on this list, I think Cori is just going to be a problem, and I think it needs to probably go. It's great in Modern. I think it's fine everywhere else. Obviously a lot weaker in Commander, but yeah, it's just not cut out for Standard. It takes over the game. Next up, we're going to talk about Stock Up. We're almost transitioning through different archetypes at the moment. As I mentioned earlier, Stock Up is a pretty big role player in Cori-Steel for finding the card. It's also a really big role player in Omniscience, which also uses it conveniently to find its main pieces. I think Stock Up is a really powerful card draw spell. I mean, undoubtedly, it sees play in Legacy. It's a great Commander card if you haven't played it yet in Commander. Being able to locate just the piece you need at the right given time, it's really powerful. I think it is an enabler, not really a problematic card in my mind. I think, yes, obviously, I groan a little bit when I see Izzet play this card because they've replenished their hand. It's an aggro deck that now has more gas than ever, and they probably drew Cori-Steel Cutter or another equivalent threat with Stock Up. But I do think Stock Up has an important role to play to give slower decks a chance to play right now. And I think you can't really get rid of Stock Up without really hurting the possibility of those decks to go. As much as I loathe Azurius Control, I do think it deserves a place in the meta, and I think Stock Up is a pretty important card for that, as is Meringue River Regent, but that's not really in the discussion right now. I think the main argument for it not being banned here is the fact that there are future decks out there from a variety of different backgrounds that could exist because of Stock Up existing. And for that reason, while I do see a world where it could be banned, given its impact and its sheer draw power, I really don't think it's the target right now to be able to correct sort of the aggro meta we live in right now. Next up, we're going to have a very notorious card if you've watched this channel before. Up the Beanstalk is one of my public enemies in terms of powerful cards that do a lot for how much you pay for them. Up the Beanstalk has been around for a while, as long as Monstrous Rage, fittingly enough, and this is probably the other end of the scale. So Monstrous Rage heralds a lot of aggro decks. I think Up the Beanstalk equally is the backbone of a lot of slow, mid-range, engine-y kind of decks. While Up the Beanstalk has obviously fallen out of favor recently, given our new aggro overlords. Speaking of overlords though, I think Up the Beanstalk existing alongside a lot of different cards at the moment, namely the overlords, probably a problematic behavior in the future. If this thing didn't read draw a card when it came into the battlefield, I think it would probably be better. But my concern with Up the Beanstalk is that in a world where, let's say aggro slows down and we go back to slower, more mid-range, engine-orientated decks, you can play things like Unholy Annex, you can play new Hollow Merc Siege. The problem I have with cards like these is when I play them in my decks, I'm thinking to myself, Up the Beanstalk would probably get me more value. If I am playing Annex and I'm against a Beanstalk player, they will outvalue me, especially since half the cards in their deck draw them a card. I think Up the Beanstalk, while a build around card, does lead to a behavior where a player leaning into Up the Beanstalk will just outvalue any other mid-range or value-orientated deck. And I think for that reason, this is probably going to be the first preemptive ban, because I believe that if you ban out aggro, let's imagine a world where aggro is gone, you are going to have a Beanstalk problem. I do think Beanstalk decks come back in force. It's not only the new Yuna and the Overlords. I mean, Xur will rotate out, but I suspect we'll still be seeing Overlord. You could, run this in a Golgari pile, Selesnya mid-range pile. All these decks that have other draw engines that could be incentivized to look into them probably won't, because Up the Beanstalk exists. And I think Up the Beanstalk probably could go because of that. Next up, I want to talk about Hopeless Nightmare. Now, I will say this with the bias of someone who plays a lot of Pixie. This was my deck of choice in the previous Standard Championship / Pro Tour season. Hopeless Nightmare probably is one of those cards that promotes a really toxic play pattern that a lot of players don't like. Let's be honest. It has a very clear counter, and by that I mean, oh, okay, I'm against Pixie, so I'm going to put an Obstinate Baloth or Wilt Leaf Liege. I think that doesn't give Hopeless Nightmare an excuse. I think for 1 mana and its ability to be constantly bounced, the Pixie deck is very notorious for, Hopeless Nightmare really packs a punch. If it just discarded a card, I think players would just get frustrated by it, but the fact that it twists the knife in and makes you lose 2 life each time, and you play games where a Pixie player will bounce this thing over and over again, it becomes really, really painful to play again. And the counter, which I mentioned earlier, as a Pixie player I can say this, my favorite thing is playing against green and running Hopeless Nightmare in game 1 and then immediately taking it out of my deck, because my opponent will put in Obstinate Baloth, they will put in Wilt Leaf Liege, and I've just immediately not only taken out, the thing that enables that card, it becomes a dead card in their hand, and then I can just outvalue them with other cards. It's a really powerful play pattern, honestly. Hopeless Nightmare in particular has really fallen out of favor, given the fact that aggro decks usually laugh at the player trying to bounce an enchantment and just usually shotgun them in the face. Pixie did have a good matchup into mono red aggro, being able to repeatedly bounce, nowhere to run. That will probably continue even without Hopeless Nightmare. I think the deck can function still without it, but I do think it's probably a little bit too efficient for what it does. And look, I think we need to consider the fact that people want to actually enjoy playing Standard, and I do think that for that reason, Hopeless Nightmare is probably a really good candidate for a preemptive ban, just to remove the play pattern that people have kind of broadly said they don't enjoy playing against in Standard. And I say this as a Pixie player. I play this card, and I do enjoy playing it, but I also recognize my opponent not enjoying it. Up next, we have one of my targeted cards that I would like to see banned, and this is Manifold Mouse. If you have watched my mouse video, this is public enemy #1 on how I think you can slow down the mice aggro decks for good. I think if you remove Manifold Mouse from the equation, the mice package can still exist, but it loses an important trigger for Valiant and also loses an easy ability to get double strike. I think these two factors are crucial to being able to slow down the mice red aggro deck. I think if you ban just Monstrous Rage, Manifold Mouse with a buff spell will still deal 12, 14 damage to you on a turn, and you'll probably still lose on turn 3. It's just gonna be that way, I think, unfortunately. And I think the real solution is you have to hit Manifold Mouse. There's not much more that needs to be said. If you want to hear my full ramblings on the power level of mice and this card, I highly recommend you watch my video on it. I did put a lot of heart into that one. And I do think for that reason, Manifold Mouse will be our 99% banned card. Now, I do put it in here and not 100% banned because I can see Wizards of the Coast taking the absolute ban minimum. This is where we get into the debate over how many cards Wizards would ban. I think the cards up here are probably going to be banned. I would expect to see at least these two cards. I would like to see more cards banned. As you can start to sort of see on this list, I think these first 3 columns start to fill into the category of cards that I think probably should be banned if we want Standard to actually change and not be an aggro pile. There are obviously 3 more cards to put on the list here, but Manifold Mouse, as I said, if we want red aggro to really slow down and not actually murder people outright before they can get going, I think Manifold Mouse is the card you have to hit. I would expect this card to be banned, but I can see a case where it doesn't get banned, for better or worse, unfortunately. If you are a mouse player, you'll probably be clamoring for this card to stay intact, but I do think you need to lose your toys a little bit. Mice players have been eating good for quite a while now. Next up, we're going to talk about This Town Ain't Big Enough. This card is also appearing in the bounce package as a card that is the bane of people's nightmares. I think for a few reasons that this card is not the card you ban. As I might have alluded to earlier, and as you've probably already seen by now, I have put Hopeless Nightmare in the card you hit to ban, but also I put up the Beanstalk as a card you should ban. If you can ban these 2 cards, keep in mind, these are 2 permanent targets, I think that you'll have This Town Ain't Big Enough weakened substantially. It won't draw you cards off up the Beanstalk. Hopeless Nightmare is one of its premier bounce targets. I think you will find this card end up in a much healthier space. Longer term, there may be a problematic permanent that does end up getting bounced, and I do think it might be in the conversation then, but I think This Town Ain't Big Enough has an interesting enough play pattern that you can keep it around if you get rid of the cards that are problematic with it. And those are mass discard and mass card draw. And I think for that reason, This Town Ain't Big Enough joins VV in the will not be banned category. And if you're still seething, if This Town Ain't Big Enough not being banned is bothering you, consider that I also think Stormchaser's talent should probably be a preemptive ban. I think this card in combination with repeated bounce is a pretty problematic play pattern, particularly the loop that is become almost notorious, where people will level it up to level 2, return This Town Ain't Big Enough to their hand, and then use it to bounce Stormchaser's talent back to your hand to do it again, basically. I think this 2-card combo in particular does outvalue a lot of decks, particularly in the later game, which we haven't seen in a while, admittedly. Is it Prowess has started doing this with Vivi, which is able to give you the mana? I think Stormchaser's talent is just a little too good. It's a bit frustrating when you feel like you've equalized with Is It as well. Then they level up this talent, bring back Into the Floodmaw or some burn spell, and then just donk you, and you lose, right? I think Stormchaser's talent has had a good run. Like, it's not even really an otter deck, but being able to mass create Stormchaser's talent little 1/1 prowess otters, that does make a really aggressive opener. And I just think there's a lot going for removing this card, honestly, if you want Standard to slow down. Not only would Standard slow down, but also you would see a probably bit more of an open horizon for less aggro-orientated decks to be able to keep up with the decks that currently abuse Stormchaser's talent. This Town Ain't Big Enough. And last, and definitely not least, we have Omniscience. The most problematic thing about this card is probably the fact that it is in the Foundation set, which despite the fact it's a turn 4 kill combo right now, it's going to be around until 2030 at least. I think Azurius Omniscience, while certainly not the front runner, is probably not a healthy combo to exist in the game. I think winning the game on turn 4, blanket statement, probably isn't what standard players want to do. I know that it gets overshadowed a little bit by aggro that kills you faster or just as fast. I think Azurius Omniscience is a little bit of a solitaire deck sometimes, where it's like, did I discard Omniscience? And then it's a binary. Do you have Graveyard Hate to stop me? In game 2 and 3 as well, this combo is robust enough to be able to stop you from interacting with them as well. It runs Voice of Victory, Grand Abolisher, runs Counter Magic. There is a lot that makes this deck a little difficult to deal with. I think this is like a cheesy Reanimator deck turned up to 10. If I lose to this deck because I didn't draw my Ghost Vacuum, that feels bad to me. I am not alone in disliking this deck generally. It does make me kind of glad it's not the best deck, though. I think a world where Omniscience is the best deck in the format would probably be, ironically enough, a worse meta to play in than Mice Aggro and Is It Cori-Steel Cutter. Longer term, probably this card needs to go. Having said that, though, will it actually be banned? No, I really don't think it will. As much as this card bothers me, I think Wizards will try and keep the amount of bans to an absolute minimum, and I think Omniscience will get away this time. The most annoying thing about this is I expect Stock Up will stay in the format too, meaning that Azurius Omniscience, maybe with the exception of losing Temporary Lockdown and a few of its bounce cards on rotation, will be pretty intact. There is a world where if mid-range becomes a lot better, maybe they can main deck in cards that hate out Azurius Omniscience. One of the most interesting matchups that Azurius Omniscience struggles against, particularly in game 1, is actually Gruul Delirium, which is an aggro deck, but it runs the 2 mana 3/3 that's able to exile cards from a grave. I think that's actually really fun. And there may be cards coming, or that may already exist, that could exist in mid-range strategies, that can inherently hate out Azurius Omniscience at all stages of the game. And when I say that, I mean game 1, 2, and 3. If that does exist, I think Azurius Omniscience is actually a healthier addition to the format than it currently is. It's hard to see that right now, given the fact that we don't really have room to run Graveyard Hate, given the fact that playing Assault Guide Lantern will just instantly get us kneecapped by the mouse player. But time will tell. I think Azurius Omniscience will be the first deck to watch post-ban, because I do really think that it will stay as it is. Those are my thoughts on the 10 cards that I think are in the discussion for ban. I imagine there will be some in here you don't entirely agree with, but there may be some you're really happy to see. My personal opinion is that Wizards should go for more bans than less, given the fact that this is their once a year ban update. We don't know how big the scale of the bans will be, as I said. I do hope it's on the higher end though, and it's not just these 2 cards. There's a bit of an argument being made for Cori not being banned too. I really think it will be banned though. I think we've seen what it can do. It's not going to stick around. Some of these cards that are on the low chance bans may become problematic in the future. We'll see. Till then, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.